Hello and welcome to today's training. We're just giving everyone a couple of moments to log in via Zoom and navigate through that waiting room. So we'll give everybody maybe 2 more minutes before we get started. But thank you all for joining us, and you're definitely welcome to start saying hello in the chat box and warming up our space together. All right. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for session 1 of Youth Voice and Evaluation and Understanding Evaluation for youth advocates, youth leaders, youth coordinators, youth peers. We're really excited to share Zoom space with you all today. We're going to go ahead and get started. There may be a few more participants joining us, but they'll be warmly welcomed as we roll through these introductory slides. And we want to make sure that we have time for all of the activities that we're planning for today. So I'm going to open the space with just a quick introduction to our NTAC Center that is bringing this training opportunity to you. And then Matt and I will say hello before we pass to intros for everyone joining us on Zoom. All right, today's training is coming from NTAC. A bit more about that acronym in a minute. We receive funding from SAMHSA to support this work and offer trainings like this one today. The contents that we are sharing and that are on the slides do not necessarily represent the official views or endorsement by SAMHSA or the US government. In case anything happens with technology security throughout today's session, we'll end this session, and via email, you'll be receiving a separate Zoom link to rejoin us. So should that happen, make sure that you log into your email for next steps. NTAC, or the National Training and Technical Assistance Center, is funded by SAMHSA to support the children's and youth mental health workforce to increase their capacity to offer services to children and youth across the country. We are a team of a lot of organizations with a lot of different specialty areas. Matt and I are joining you all from Youth Move National today, but as you can see from this slide, we're just one of many partners that resource this center. And if you have technical assistance requests in other areas beyond today's session, we'll be including information at the end of the session about how to make those requests and access support. Our work at the center is to reach the goal that all children, youth, young adults, and families have emotional or behavioral health needs can access evidence-based treatment and recovery services in a well-coordinated system of care. Thanks all for being a part of that in your own community. We are here to serve a lot of audiences across the country. Each of you found us, which means you're part of our audience. We offer other trainings, resources, and technical assistance for all of the audiences listed on this slide. And if you think that we might be able to help you, you should ask. The answer is probably yes. We provide many different offerings of services. You're experiencing an online training today on a specific topic, but we make several products, tip sheets, tools, resources, and then offer individual consultation as well. All right, that's the NTAC. We're really glad to be hosting you all today and glad that you found us through the registration for this session. I'm Johanna Bergen. I'm the Executive Director at Youth Move National, and I also serve as the Transition the Youth and Young Adult Transitions Transformation Team at the NTAC, so provide leadership and expertise around youth engagement, youth leadership, and youth peer support throughout all of our activities. I'm here with you all today because when I was a young person in my home community here in rural Iowa, I was asked to join something called the Systems of Care Governance Council. I didn't know what that meant. I felt a little bit like I was being voluntold to show up, but what it turned out to be was an opportunity for the service providers in a 6-county area to ask me what worked and what didn't work as I tried to receive mental health services throughout my teen and late adolescent years. And I believe that we've created a stronger system of care and support for young people because they were so willing to listen to myself and other youth advisors. Throughout the last 13 years, I've moved on from that youth advisory role to support youth move chapters across the country, other system of care grantees, and now get to offer trainings and opportunities like the one today. So really glad to be in space with you. Super glad I'm not alone with you all and joined by my colleague, Matt, also from Youth Move. Can I pass over to you, Matt, to say hello?
Absolutely. Thank you, Johanna. And thank you everybody for being here. My name is Matt, he, him, his pronouns, calling in from Windham, Maine, which is just outside of Portland. I am the communications coordinator here at Youth Move National. But back just a few years ago, back in 2013, I actually got my start connected with Youth Move as a chapter in Maine. And so we're a statewide chapter at the time, and I got into this right out of college as a youth coordinator and learned a lot on the ground working with young people face to face, and then became the manager of that statewide program, and then got more involved with, like Johanna's saying, like the system of care, still a little unfamiliar with what that meant at the time, but serving on boards across the state for a variety of services, and learned a lot. And then eventually I was consulting with Youth Move National over a period of years, and then got this opportunity. So really started from sort of that like ground level and have worked my way, and now I'm in a national scope. I got started in this work pretty much when I was 14 years old. I joined the Upward Bound program working with low SES students as a high school student who came from that background and was trying to figure out college aspirations. Graduated from that program and then ended up working with them for 10 years. And so had a background in media as well, and then had that background with education, social justice, social services, and then have been combining those two things ever since. And so I'm really happy to offer that because as a lot of you all probably know, when you're in sort of these types of positions, communications designs, web graphics, branding, those things, they don't always come in with your funding. So I've always been really appreciative that I'm able to sort of offer that dual role. So that's a little bit about me. And then now I think we're going to go on to what we're looking for, who's in the group. So some of you, if you've been on a presentation with us before, you might know what Mentee is. But Mentee is basically a way when we're in a big group to poll everybody and see who's in the group, get some responses in kind of a different way. So you can do this on your computer, you can do it on your web browser that you're working in already, or you can use your smartphone or tablet, basically anything that has a web browser, and just go to Mentee, MENTI.com. When you arrive there, it's going to ask for a code. And so your code is 99835792. And so that's going to pop up a series of questions that we're going to see who's in the group at a larger, and we'll have a moment, we'll have an opportunity in a few moments to be in small groups and introduce ourselves in sort of a different, more intimate way. But just from a sort of bird's eye perspective, want to see who's with us today. So the first question is going to be, where are you from? We're looking for just like a one-word answer. This is going to give us, or you can kind of squeeze in the city and state as well, just to see where we're coming in from. Washington, we have Canton, Ohio, Pasadena, Florida. I'm wondering if Pasadena Simone, I recognize your name coming in. Lexington, Kentucky, East Lansing, Florida. Oh, Pasadena is getting big, so maybe we have some more folks coming in from there as well. Colorado, Iowa. I haven't typed mine in, but Maine is also should be appearing in that word cloud as well. Mississippi. This is great. I love when it's truly national. I think in the last year and a half, when we've been seeing how we've turned very virtual as a country in the work we do, Youth Move has been that way for a long time, but it's great to see that we can connect with folks in other communities that we might not have been able to otherwise, and it provides us this opportunity to connect with you all. Woodburn, Oregon, Baltimore. Yeah, truly national, which is awesome to see. In Colorado, awesome. So, and then if you truly are having a difficult time with Menti, you can always pop in where you're joining us in the chat box as well.
Great. About 2/3 of us have answered, so thank you all for figuring out how to use Menti. We have a few more questions for you coming in. Matt, just let me know when you want me to move on to new questions.
Sure, and just like a side, we'll move on in a second, just as a side note, Menti is a great way to, as we're going to be talking about evaluation, part of this is modeling a cool tool that you can use in virtual settings to get feedback that might be a little bit more interesting than your standard just discussion or the chat box. You get the colors and there's other options. So hopefully this will inspire those who haven't used this to potentially look into it for your own purposes. All right, let's move on to the next question. So the next question is, what roles do you hold? So we kind of saw a little bit of this as a preview when we got your registration. We know that we have peer providers, coordinators. So what roles are you in your communities? Kind of like the bar graph's almost like a battle now. Who do we have the most of in this group? A lot of evaluators. That's cool to see. Looking pretty even on the other positions. Healthy transitions grantee, youth peer providers. Evaluator, system of care grantee. Okay. So it looks pretty evenly spaced for those who have responded so far, which is cool to see, because I think that as we go through this presentation, there's going to be bits and pieces that you might be familiar with based on what your role is. And then hopefully as we move through some other processes based on your role and what your familiarity with evaluation and youth voice is, that you're getting different things out of what we're sharing as well. And then hopefully those are the group that is in the evaluator section, that you're learning some new things, especially when it comes to involving youth and young adults into the evaluation process. All right, let's go to our last question.
And as I do that, we got another person chiming in as a youth peer in the chat. So imagine that bar graph going up a little bit.
Awesome.
Wrong question. Hold on. I think I got too excited and moved you.
Two slides.
Two slides. What's the next
question?
Show up, Matt?
What's that?
What's the next question you want to have show up?
So the next question for introductions will be, after the training, what do you hope to be able to do? What are some of the goals or the thoughts that you had coming in here? Sort of like a wish list of, okay, here's what I hope to come away from the training with. So what do you hope to be able to do when you go back to your roles that you were sharing just a moment ago? So there it is. After this training, what do you hope to be able to do? So again, modeling this, there's all kinds of different options to display the results of what you're seeking. So this is great for focus groups and other other meeting spaces in virtual space. So some of the things that are coming in: learn how to ethically engage youth in the evaluation process. That's awesome. I feel like that's a really unique answer that I have not seen before in this kind of a space. Because we talk about authenticity a lot, but ethics plays a big role in evaluation as well. Increased youth voice and choice, amazing. How to develop evaluations, that's the 101 part of like, how do I get started and get into this? Actionable practices for applying equity and partnering with youth. Learn something other than Menti.com. Yes, there are plenty of cool tools. Bring ideas to leadership on how to prioritize youth voice and feedback. Yeah, how do you get other stakeholders invested in what you're learning and what you want to see happening, as well as the young people that you're working with, to better understand evaluation? We hope that is like the baseline for everybody today. Help actionable, we read that one. More effective evaluation. So how do you increase the efficacy or your ability to perform evaluation? Increase youth voice, choice, and empowerment. That's why we're here and what we get so jazzed about. Lots of blinking on my screen. Learn how to better engage with youth in evaluation. That will definitely be covered today. Increase the ability of youth to use, no, it went away. We'll come back to that one. I hope to be able to, oh, that went away too. You're seeing them too on the screen, so we don't need to go through every one of these. And we can, after the end of the presentation, we can send a snapshot of this to everybody as well, if folks are interested in that. But yeah, a lot of common threads: how to involve young people into this process, how to make it more effective through the evaluation process, involving community members. That's a big part. When you're done with the evaluation, how do you share it with other folks that are in the community? Because then it just becomes sort of the sounding board for your own organization. And you obviously want sometimes a bigger change in the community other than just what you're doing. These are all great. A lot of the stuff will be covered. And if it doesn't get covered, we will get you covered with any questions or thoughts that you have for after the training. So thank you everybody for participating. I know there was somebody who said using something other than Menti, and maybe we can give a couple tool tips for other cool interactive things that we've used later on in the presentation. So we're going to do some small breakout rooms now, and we just want folks to be able to connect a little bit different than just the word cloud, and get a little bit more perspective about who's in our group. And sometimes you really meet some really other cool people that you might be able to connect with and share something that or something that you might be able to partner in some other way. So it's always good to get to know people a little bit more intimately than the Menti polls. So we want folks to share their name, pronouns, where you're located, maybe a little more specifically, what you do. So we talked about the roles, but maybe a little bit more of a description of what your day-to-days look like. And then just as a little icebreaker, what's your hidden talent? What's something that somebody might not know about you? Mine is that I can vibrate my eyeballs, which I don't remember where or how I learned how to do that. It's just something I can do. So what's that little thing that you like bust out when you're chatting with other people in a group? That is something you can do. It doesn't have to be anything that odd. It can be, dancing, it can be anything. So we're gonna break you off now and give you probably 10 to 15 minutes to complete that task, just so you get a little bit more connected to the folks that are in the group. All right, I think everyone's back now. Thanks everybody for getting to know each other a little bit better and sharing your hidden talents. If you want, you can share them in the chat as well so everybody else can get a sense of what that might have been. We are going to move on. We're going to talk a little bit about just what we hope to accomplish with this presentation and what we hope that you'll get out of understanding evaluation, as well as incorporating youth voice into that process as well. So some of our learning goals for today is, if we're talking about foundation, what are some of those key terms and things that we want to focus on of like, what does evaluation really mean? And then additionally in that, when we're evaluating programs for our own program, and then as I mentioned earlier, the greater community, how are we involving youth into the work? And I think the first step is looking at what you hope to accomplish and why it's important to incorporate that youth voice for both yourself, your role, your organization, and your community. We hope to identify some strategies for establishing and developing what those plans are going to be for both your organization, and that might kind of filter into the community. For programs and grants, if we think about our funding structures and grants, sometimes there's a requirement for evaluation. So how do we engage in that? But not just doing it because it's the requirement, but because we want to make better programs as well. And then also identify strategies for what we've been talking about, and what why Youth Move is really at this table is, how do you incorporate youth voice and evaluations in an authentic, and I like what we talked about earlier, an ethical way. We talk a lot about in youth engagement at Youth Move is like not tokenizing young people. So how do you do that in a way that is meaningful and exciting? Evaluation for a lot of people can seem jargony or difficult to kind of connect to. So what are some authentic and interesting ways you can do that as well?
Awesome. Thanks for helping us understand why we're here today and what we're going to do, Matt. I'm going to do a quick plug right now for the fact that this is one of a 3-part series. So some of you were asking for really amazing learning in the initial Mentee pool, and some of those things are things that will be covered in a more in-depth way in session 2 and session 3. So as we end today, we'll give a little bit of a teaser about what topics will be in both of those sessions. But I do want you all to sort of hold on for the ride as we determined we couldn't cover everything we wanted to in one of these sessions. Okay. So I'm going to get us started with an introduction to evaluation. And this is really a section that's designed to think about how do we welcome young people into understanding evaluation with us, right? So I think oftentimes when we engage with communities, they're looking for ways to roles and opportunities to engage young people, and asking youth to create and be a part of and to analyze results and evaluation are not always on the list. And we would really encourage putting these roles on the list to engage young people with lived experience, because we know, and we have a robust group of youth advisors at Youth Move National who really love to be a part of work like this. Okay, so why do we evaluate? Why do we talk about this? We want to figure out if we are meeting the goals of our youth program, our peer program, our system of care grantee, right? If we don't evaluate the work that we're doing, how will we know if we're being successful in our efforts? We evaluate in order to document our successes so that we can share them with other audiences, potential investors, potential partners. Evaluation can be one of the many ways that we show and document success in our youth engagement strategies. Evaluation is also often key to sustaining our efforts. So we asked you at the beginning how many of you were engaged in either a system of care or healthy transition grant. Those are just a couple of examples of grants that you all might be involved in. And the nature of a grant is usually that it's time limited. So we might have 2 or 4 or 5 years to really invest in transforming the youth mental health system. But then what, right? And the then what question can often be answered through evaluation of what we're trying to do. Evaluation can definitely help young people increase and become successful in their advocacy efforts. And we'll have some examples of that later in today's presentation. Evaluation can help us make day-to-day decisions. So a term that's often thrown around is that we want to make data-informed decisions, meaning we've collected data about the work that we do and we reflect and use that data to make decisions. Sometimes that might mean we decide to stop offering some type of programming or some type of service because our evaluation is showing us that it's not effective or that young people aren't really digging it and that's not how they want to access support. Evaluation is also closely connected to quality improvement efforts. We'll talk about that a little bit more as well. And evaluation can help us decide what we should keep doing and what we should let go of. I always tell this story in youth engagement trainings, right? People ask, what happens when you get together with young people and you try to make plans? And I say that every time I get together in a room of youth advocates, we decide that we're going to change the world. And usually the timeline for that is we're going to change the world tomorrow. And I'm a proponent of thinking about how evaluation can help us determine and decide what strategies we have time and energy and are good at, and what strategies do we need to let go, because changing the world might take more than a day and it's going to take a lot of energy and resources. So let's make sure we're being really strategic about it. So many great reasons to evaluate. So we're going to talk about evaluation throughout this 3-part series. Really quickly, what's the cycle or what's the experience of evaluation? And it's pretty straightforward when you look at it in a visual like this on the screen, right? We're going to plan, right? And we'll talk more particularly in the next section about planning periods being useful to determine what sort of data we want to collect. What are the questions we're trying to answer with our evaluation? But just like there's a planning period for your program offerings, there's a planning period for your evaluation efforts. Then we implement the evaluation section. This often means that we go out and collect data, right? This is when we're putting into practice the strategies we're using for our evaluation. And the next step is that we look at all those results. This is oftentimes called analysis, right? This is when we look at big spreadsheets of raw data or maybe really fun Menti poll responses and start asking ourselves, what does all of this information mean to us? And how might we want to organize this information in a way that it might be helpful to meet our initial goals that we were planning in our evaluation? The next stage of the cycle is to use what we found out, right? So we may use information within our own programmatic team to make decisions. We may use that information to report out to stakeholders or to advocate for a message. But a really key part of the evaluation cycle is that we actually let the data we collected do good work in the world, right? And then guess what? We start over again, right? So there's always sort of an iterative process to evaluation. And if you work for an organization like Youth Move, you're sort of starting the planning phase of evaluation for different projects, one after the other. So some days I feel like we're in all 4 of these parts of the cycle in different programs at any given time. All right. So this is really that speaking to that 4th part of the cycle. So we've collected all of this data, we've thought about what it means, but like that was a lot of work. As we work together over these 3 sessions, we're going to realize that we spend a lot of energy and resources on data collection. And so how do we make sure that that effort was worth it and that we really put our data to work? So data can help us in many ways. Data can build our organizational capacity. So I know that Youth Move is not alone in being a youth-run organization that is looking for a sustainability strategy all the time. We want to be here in the world doing this work for a long time. And so one of the ways we use the data that we collect is to show that the work we're doing is effective. And we tell that story when we apply for grants, We tell that story when we're doing fundraising. We tell that story when we're asking stakeholders to invest in the work of Youth Move chapters. And over time, being able to tell our story of effectiveness with data has grown our capacity as an organization. Collecting data can help us unearth and identify the needs young people in our community have that are not being met, and can be a really good building block for then being able to move forward meeting those needs. So for those of you that are involved in sort of a youth-run program or organization already, you know that young people have a really important insight in terms of what is missing in their community to have really supported, successful adolescent and young adulthood experiences. And so if we organize the collection of input from young people to identify those needs, then we have the data we need to plan programming to fill those needs. We can take data to enhance our own personal growth. So we'll share in some examples later where young people have been engaged in evaluation processes that have enhanced their own personal and professional experiences. And the data you collect might show the programs and services you offer might have some gaps or holes where you could be investing more deeply in meeting young people's needs. Data definitely shows us that we're successful and that we're accomplishing things. I think this is important on two levels. It's often important to funders of opportunities, stakeholders, coalition members. It's also important for us to celebrate our own success and accomplishments. Making change by sharing our lived experience is big and often heavy work. And if we don't remember to pause and celebrate and look back to the things that we've accomplished, it can be hard to stay in the work for the long term. So really thinking about in those planning phases, how are we evaluating in order to be able to celebrate a little bit later. And then we'll touch on this again later in a little bit. Data can be a part of our quality improvement. How do we keep doing the work day to day a little bit better each day by looking at the data that we collect? I said we were going to talk about quality improvement. So we are going to, throughout these sessions, talk about both quality improvement and evaluation strategies, because we know each of you are in a little bit different place in your programming. And when we do breakout activities, we welcome you to sort of lean into the direction of what fits best for where you are in your work. At Youth Move, we talk about, so first, what is quality improvement? So quality improvement is a process used to systematically improve your program. So similar to how we presented the evaluation cycle, quality improvement has a very similar cycle, right? Let's look at the work that we're doing, ask ourselves some critical questions and look at the data, analyze what that data is telling us, like, is programs working? Are programs not working? And then decide if we want to continue to do something, change the way that we're doing something, or let something go. There are many quality improvement tools and processes and cycles out there. I have a personal affinity for the one that we have on the slide today, which is a plan, do, study, act cycle. Oftentimes you'll hear folks shorten that to the acronym a Pdsa. My affinity comes from this because my youth was filled with many years of 4-H programming, and there was a Pdsa cycle built into literally every part of our program. And so it's something that sort of like breathed into action. But a Pdsa is pretty easily understood and obtainable for all of us to use. So just like the evaluation cycle, the first step comes with planning. Then we do the activity. Then we study or reflect on the activity, and then we act on our learnings. And we just continue rolling the Pdsa cycle over and over again, continuing to improve our work. An example of this at Youth Move, we track everyone who asks us questions. We are an open door to youth advocates and youth peers for any type of question to support their work. And then we track all the questions that came in, how we responded to those questions, and every quarter we sit down and look at that data that we collected, and we determine What is this data telling us? Could we do something a little bit different to be more responsive to folks that are asking us questions? Or are we doing things really well? So let's continue sort of status quo. This wasn't planned, but we actually had that conversation, our quarterly conversation as staff earlier today. So we do practice the Pdsa cycle every year. And when we're making plans for evaluation in section 2, some of you might be interested in thinking about how to implement a Pdsa cycle with young people in some sort of programming or offering you are making in your community right now. Yes, still my slide. Okay, we also want to introduce you to some vocabulary around participatory evaluation. So we like this definition a lot. Participatory evaluation is a partnership approach to evaluation in which stakeholders actively engage in developing the evaluation at all phases of its implementation. And really what this means is if we're going to practice participatory evaluation, we're going to invite the stakeholders the evaluation is focused on into partnership with us. So for those of us in this space, this likely means we're asking youth and young adults, who are the ones we're asking to evaluate or participate in the data collection. We are thus asking them to join us as stakeholders in planning, designing, and implementing the evaluation. There are a lot of participatory evaluation terms out there. Many of you might have heard something like youth participatory action research, or YPAR, or other sort of participatory research and evaluation strategies. Many of them are similar in design. We have resources at the end of today's training pointing you to some of the resources we love best around engaging young people in this style of evaluation. We want to make sure that this is vocab that we're hearing about, as we often find that young people get engaged in evaluation and then only later are able to look back and realize that this was, they were part of a YPAR initiative, or they were a part of a participatory evaluation process. And I think there are a couple of sort of underlying values to the work that Youth Move brings to the work. And that is that youth have expertise and have the capacity to participate as evaluation partners with us. And I use partners in sort of an equal weight, not just as advisors or consultants or, you know, one part of the process, but truly to join us equally in evaluation. And we also believe that if we're collecting data and evaluation about programs and services that support young people, and we're asking young people to share their data with us, that then we have a responsibility to return the data to the young people, right? So if we're asking you to share of your experience and to participate in evaluation, then it's our responsibility to feed that back into the community so young people can make use of that data, just like our evaluation partners may be using it. Oh, and I see at the very corner of this slide, y'all will get slides. The YPAR Hub at Berkeley is one of our favorite youth participatory action research things. So on this slide, even when you get that. Matt, can I pass to you to talk a little bit about Youth Voice?
Absolutely. So we want to go into this. It sounds like we talked a little bit about this in my breakout group, and I'm sure it's a reason why everybody's here is wanting to incorporate youth voice into this process. What does that look like? If you are in that peer support role or a youth coordinator role, you're understanding from your perspective that it's important to have your voice at the table and then the young people in the community. I think from a baseline, we'll talk about a couple of different reasons, but I think from a baseline, when you ask somebody what their opinion is about something, they're going to feel validated, and that's true. That's the human experience. So, and I think for young people, a lot of the experience maybe in services or programs in their home and their school, things are given to and not done with. And so being able to communicate in a way where you're asking for that feedback and asking for those opinions can be really empowering, a really empowering process for young people to say, hey, my voice does matter. Somebody cares about what I think, whether it's your program, whether it's about the community, whether it's about adult perceptions of young people. So I think like that's sort of like when we're talking about these different reasons, that's sort of the well in which everything is coming from. You're going to develop relationships in any youth program. Relationship building is important. So in engaging in evaluation with young people and creating a process and a space, you're going to be developing that in a different kind of way potentially. And then young people are going to get different types of experience in that. There's going to be an education, probably, if it is about how do you go through evaluation, how do you move through the process. And then it's just providing an extra opportunity for young people to engage in something. So when we're looking at why it's important, I mean, one of the biggest reasons is you're responding to the needs of the stakeholders, which are the young people. So if it's a program or something that's happening in your community, you're directly asking those questions, whether it's through interviews or surveys or even a special project. You're looking to make change with young people by asking them and responding to what that might look like in your community. And like I said before, there's going to be hopefully some education and development. There's opportunities to create leadership roles, to create learning opportunities that will hopefully empower youth to be engaged in that process, but other future processes as well, other programs you have, other community events that might be just the sort of door opening that they need to get connected into the community. As Johanna talked about a little bit with the quality improvement of the evaluation design, by having young people active in that process, you're creating more efficacy of your evaluation by saying, these are the stakeholders and they were involved in creating this process, looking at the results and hopefully creating some kind of changes out of that process. You're promoting youth engagement in the community. So you're creating those opportunities, as I said before, but hopefully the community, as you're giving that feedback into the system, they're taking notice. Hopefully, maybe they'll be reaching out to you. Hey, we're looking to involve young people in our programs as well. And those might be other opportunities for young people as well, or at least ways for those programs to then enhance their evaluation processes. And then you're kind of equalizing the power between youth and adults. Just the other day, we were working on a project and I was talking to somebody who is working at one of our Youth Move chapters, and they said that one of the programs that they do is they have mini sessions about different policy changes that are happening in their local community. And so they have these mini learning sessions. It could be about foster care, it could be about juvenile justice. And it's just a quick primer about what are the issues, what's happening. But what happens is when something comes up and there's like a flag day or something that young people might be going to help advocate with, they have that education and they can articulate in a different way than strategic storytelling is really important. But sometimes adults who hold power will give more credit if there is, some foundational knowledge or understanding about what those issues are. So that will help balance the power dynamics between potentially adults that have power who might not be as invested as some of us might be into hearing what youth have to say, especially when it comes to evaluation, because I think we have a certain perception about what that means. And then also there's going to be fresh insight when you get young people involved. There's going to be blind spots that you don't think of. That's just part of having more voices in the process that will help you see things from a different perspective. And part of that will be, are my questions youth friendly? Am I using jargon? Is this, are people connecting to, like if you're interviewing, are they connecting to the interviewee? Or so there's a lot of perspectives that will be gained by having young people involved in the process throughout the evaluation process. And then our next, we'll talk about just some things to consider when you are involving young people into this space, because like I said, it can be kind of jargony and it can be, if it's not interesting, that can be a big turnoff. I mean, that's for anybody if something's boring or it's not well explained or articulated to me, so I don't understand it, I'm going to be less likely to be engaged, but then also want to follow up as well. Evaluation isn't like a one meeting and then we're done. So if you're looking to involve, maybe it is, we're going to be interviewing people in the community. If you want somebody to be part of that process longer term, it's important to match the skills and interests of the young people you're working with. Maybe somebody's really into journalism, and so interviewing people in the community might be a good match for that. Or maybe somebody is sort of a data head and likes the bar graphs and those kinds of things. And so maybe, and sometimes there might be some training. There's always training opportunity in there for learning those things as well. But you don't always want to match, sometimes you have like those star young people that are always volunteering. And it's good to see what the skill sets and interests especially are of the young people you're working with. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get that longevity of people being engaged and involved. It's important to develop a diverse youth leadership team. So if you think about race, gender, socioeconomic status, their lived experience, so like what systems they might come into, whether it is the juvenile justice system, mental health, whatever it is. And that's important too. I know that when I was in working as a youth coordinator in Maine, we worked on a project and we worked with the homeless shelter, we worked with career services, we worked with a drop-in center, and the demographics both regionally and then programmatically gave us a lot of different perspectives about what adults thought of young people in those communities. So it's important to develop a diverse leadership team because your community is diverse. And hopefully you can identify what some of those needs and changes are necessary based off of what those different experiences are going to look like. And Johanna kind of mentioned this a little bit, but using the research to actually make the change is important. Like she was talking about that follow-up. If I'm involved in a project or a process, and then it's like, thank you, and then I never see what happens there's going to be a disconnect. And on the flip side of that, it's a great way to reconnect. Everything gets wrapped up and then, whether it's a presentation, I've used data in art projects before, in publications. If young people are seeing their feedback and their voice in a way that's highlighted other than just talking about it in a circle, that's exciting, because what I was talking about at the beginning of the first slide about feeling validated and heard, you're seeing that literally happening in a different way. And I know that young youth that I've worked with have found that that's a really cool experience that is kind of unique that you might not see in other spaces. It's important to focus on concrete and tangible results, something that you can see or you can hear or you can explain in a way. And that's not just for the feedback for the young people, but when you want to make change in your community, you're going to want to use those results in a very maybe individual way, or maybe it is you're sharing the results through an audio story or some other way, but you want to make it clear of what the results were of that evaluation. And then connect that evaluation to advocacy. So connecting it to, like I was mentioning, like a flag day where you're going to talk to reps or senators or other folks, or use it in a blog space that you're sending out to partners or stakeholders in the community, school administrators. Find a way to creatively highlight not only the results, but the feedback and the input that you've put into it, because that is going to do that twofold, where you're validating that experience, but then you're also sharing those results with the community. So those are some things that you want to consider. There is a lot to consider in involving youth evaluations. It's not just this, it is a process, but as when Johanna was talking about that process, sometimes you got to go back through that cycle again and look at all of the components. And making sure that youth are involved in each of those segments is important if you're really trying to authentically see a change that will benefit them. So.
Great, Matt, thank you so much. And excited to dig into a little bit more of these considerations when we come back from a break. So we know that today's training covers a long period of time. We want to make sure you stop looking at your screen for a few minutes, move your body around, get some water or another beverage to fuel you this afternoon. We are going to return in 15 minutes to talk about some concrete examples about how youth voice has guided and made change through evaluation. And we will spend more time in small groups getting tangible with each other. So it is just after the hour. For me, it's 3 o'clock. Let's return at 15 minutes after whatever hour you're in. And I'll drop that in the chat too. Feel free to stay on Zoom with us and just do other work or walk away from your computer. Otherwise, we'll start up again with new content in 15 minutes. Desk, and sometimes we need a little to move our body. We're excited for you all to come back. Have low internet stability right now, so not checking if y'all can hear me.
It's a little just stuttered, like a little, a little laggy.
All right, well, I'll push some buttons over that it helps, but I think we're ready to get started, and I think you start us, Matt.
Yes, perfect. So we've talked a little bit about, ways to involve youth, why it's important, and then also just some things to keep in mind. So when you get youth at the table, it's important to think about what is the role of young people. As we mentioned earlier, things that are authentic and things that are ethical are both important when engaging young people in this space. And making sure that they're well prepared. We talk a lot about youth when we're setting up youth for successful meetings, and really being a support for young people in that space, making sure that they have all of the information is going to make the vision of what the role for young people are going to be in there. It's going to be important for you to be a support person for them as they enter into that space. So what are some of those roles that youth can be having in this process? We know, I think, from a general standpoint, that we want youth to be advisors to the work that we're doing, to kind of see, is it working, what isn't working? But they can also help create that evaluation design. What is it going to look like? Do we want to do like a field research? Do we want to do an art project? There's a lot of different ways that you can engage in research. So having young people involved in what that design looks like, and then how you carry it out or how it's implemented is going to be important. Maybe youth want to be involved in the planning stages and not so much the implementation, as far as like doing interviews or even the data analysis. Or maybe there are young people that do want to do that part, and that's what we were talking about earlier, about finding the appropriate ways to engage youth in that. And that might, require meeting with young people before you even really get into the evaluation process, is sharing what the types of roles there are and creating those relationships and seeing where the interests might lie. Consulting and creating protocols and tools. So, is it going to be surveys? Is it going to be interviews? Is it going to be an art project? Is it going to be some other form? Whatever form your evaluation is going to take place, just make sure that young people understand what it's going to be. And what we were talking about before, there might be new tools or more accessible tools if you're trying to get other feedback from young people, that youth might say, hey, maybe we want to use TikTok, or maybe there's some other like interesting or creative way to get feedback into your evaluation process that you might not be thinking about. So some of those consultations might come with recommendations about the language you're using, not using jargon. I think at the beginning, both Johan and I expressed that we came into working in system of care and didn't necessarily know the full scope or what that meant, because system of care, you can kind of maybe make some assumptions about what that means, but there might be a better way to explain that to the stakeholders that are there. And youth might be able to help you determine the best ways to express that in the final stages of your evaluation, or even in the beginning. And also advise on the effective collection methods. That's what I was just saying. Maybe it isn't just a survey. Maybe there's another way. Maybe the way in which you do a focus group isn't just sitting around a table and asking questions. I know that we got some pretty great feedback, as I've mentioned a couple of times, in doing an art project with young people through creative writing and photography. And there's ways to get feedback about programs and services and things that are going on in your community and non-traditional ways that you might think about. And that's going to be more engaging for young people, and probably more engaging as you present that to the community as well. You want to be thinking about, what does the data collection look like? If it is interviews, if it is focus groups, who's going in, who's conducting those? And it's always best, we know that funding is always an issue, but it's always best if there are paid positions to be doing this kind of work. Do you have capacity either yourself, through stipends, through other means, to be sharing the data collection with the young people that you're working with as well, and then paying folks to be doing that work, so that our time is seen as valuable, and that also just an incentive for participating as well. And then that when you're looking at the very end, coming to the end of that project or that evaluation, what does the analysis look like? Youth are going to have different perspectives about interpreting that data, just like just different team members, grant holders, like everybody's going to maybe look at things a little bit differently. But if we're looking to improve services or programs or community perceptions from and for youth, what are the youth, what are their opinions about what it looks like? They'll be able to translate, like maybe into a way that you can present it in a more youth-friendly way, especially if you're trying to improve programs and services that young people are accessing. You're going to want that to have youth-friendly language involved inherently. So maybe that translation process happens near the end of the project, and you're saying, we really want this to share this, and they're saying, well, like, I wouldn't come to that group, or I wouldn't use that service if I saw like this flyer, or if somebody explained it to me in this way. And then how and where to share those findings, because an email out to partners might be a great way to get some word out, but maybe there are other avenues through social marketing, through social media, that might be better for the community, and the young people are going to know what those tools might be for your community as well, because they're probably looking for opportunities in that same way. And then this is a way, we've talked a little bit about this, to influence policymakers and funders. If the words are coming from young people, that's going to be just more effective, especially if policymakers and funders are looking like, it's a value and important for us to change, the way that youth are involved in the foster care system in this community. And if young people from the foster care community are in that space talking about this evaluation process, or what they found, or how they want things to improve, that's going to be more effective than maybe you or me talking to them about it. There's going to be different types of value, but that's going to be more impactful from a policy change standpoint. So those are some of the ways that youth can be involved. And there might be other ways too, as you uncover. And like I said, if you're coming into a group for the first time, checking and saying, here's kind of what the possibilities are there. You might uncover through that process that there might be other ways that young people can be involved as well.
Matt, thanks for talking through some of those high-level considerations for us and really thinking about the multitude of ways young people can lead and participate in evaluation. I'm going to take us through a set of examples with everyone to really bring home what this might look like. And we tried to choose a diverse set of examples and welcome input and curiosity if you would like more information about any of these. So the first example I'm going to talk about is from a system of care grantee. So for those of you that are from a federal grantee source, this might be an example that lands well with you. Specifically, I want to call attention to the work that occurred in Vermont. They had a system of care grant that was focused on serving young adults of sort of the older age of young adults approaching the age of transition through their system of care grant. And they were able to stand up important services that were effective, investing in youth peer roles and other services that young people in their state were really desiring. And they also knew and understood from the start of their grant that there needed to be a sustainability plan beyond federal funding if they were really going to secure the goals of supporting access to mental health services to young people that they were envisioning. So throughout the life of their federal funding, they engaged local evaluation teams with a focus towards sustainable efforts. So they were looking in their evaluation for findings that would help them build a case for long-term sustainability. It was really important for these local evaluation teams to focus on partnership and building relationships with community. So this was not an evaluation team that functioned on sort of its own over in a university, not partnering in the community. It was rather a team that was focused on making relationships work with community organizations and specifically prioritizing inviting young people and family and caregivers into their evaluation efforts. Throughout the grant, they focused dollars and time in investing in training, support, and education for the youth and family members who joined them in their evaluation process. And after their grant was approaching the end of its federal funding, they gave that data that had been collected to show the success of their grant to youth and family members. And through a very concerted effort of advocacy at the state level, these youth and family advocates were able to secure sustained funding from the state for up to 75% of the level that the federal grant was covered. And you'll hear in their story, I'm going to drop a little bit more detail in the chat box about their experience, that this was dollars secured for youth mental health within a year the state was experiencing a budget deficit. And so there really was this sort of combo of powerfully, effectively done evaluation in partnership and with advocacy by young people and their families that were able to sustain the grant efforts. And I think that when we participated in an interview process with this grantee to learn a little bit more about their success, this concept of viewing partnership as part of their long-term strategy from the beginning was key, both for their evaluation findings and for their successful advocacy. So I'm sharing a little bit more about this grantee experience that was written up in the issue brief that I'm sharing. There's other key learnings from their experiences that many of you might be interested in. And I'm going to pivot to a slightly different example that we wanted to share with you. And this is an example that's really focused on that quality improvement. In this case, we were using a CQI or a continuous quality improvement lens. And this is an example of a practice that Youth Move leads with several youth-led organizations in part of our training strategy. So we worked with many organizations. Let's see, in this cycle, we worked with 10 different organizations, all of whom had a goal to either increase youth voice activities within their efforts and or to implement additional youth peer support services. Agencies we worked with started with a self-evaluation, self-reflective process to give us some baseline data about their efforts. And then through a coach approach, we worked with each agency to set some goals for their time and their work with us that they would like to focus on. For this, we wanted to do a couple of things. We wanted to make sure that we were working in partnership with youth leaders in these agencies to make actionable, tangible steps to create change. And we wanted to help show each agency that they could document the progress that they were making in a QI process that would help them keep the momentum of change making move forward beyond the experience they were having in training with us. And so in order to do this, we've created a couple of tools. These are available to anyone if you're also interested in using something like this in your community. The first tool was an action planning tool where we followed essentially a SMART-E process, if you're familiar with those goals, to help identify the goal and the strategies that would need to be implemented in order to move forward their increased youth engagement efforts. And that's pretty standard, right? So if you work in a coach approach with someone, an action planning tool is pretty commonplace. What we layered on top of it was a continuous quality improvement plan. And this is the thing where we got most excited about, right? Because we saw groups of stakeholders, including young people, being able to really ask themselves critical questions about movement or lack of movement towards their goal. So this was a process that was designed for organizations that had, our assumption was that folks had sort of zero time to spend on quality improvement. So we didn't want a fancy system. We didn't want to collect a bunch of data. We wanted to manage things in a Microsoft Word document or a Google Doc and be able to quickly and easily translate knowledge back and forth. And through this opportunity, we saw agencies meet and exceed the goals that they set. And one of the little wins that we really liked about this is that we saw agencies commit to continuing to use this QI process to monitor their progress moving forward in a really beautiful way, following the Pdsa or the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle that we were proposing in the plan. There are opportunities to engage with our team in QI practices like this if you're interested or want to know more, or if this is something where you feel like you could just pick up with a couple of resources, we'd be happy to share. I do think there was a little magic ingredient in terms of requiring both leadership at agencies and young people to engage with us in this practice of change making versus just talking to young people in a program or just talking to agency staff without their youth leaders present. We really recommend the co-partnership strategy. And the third example I want to talk about is one that we're really excited about, Youth Move. And this is an example of young people that, this is an example of youth participating in the creation of evaluation or assessment tools. So a little bit of history and another example within this example, Youth Move National has a number of youth advisory structures. Like many of you probably do. We convene several youth advisory groups. Oftentimes they gather around a specific project or initiative that they're passionate about. But our overall advisory structure is called the Youth Best Practice Committee. And we're always actively looking for young people who want to engage us in that work. So if you're a young person looking for an opportunity and this evaluation stuff sounds cool, you should listen up now. Our Youth Best Practice Committee convenes sort of globally as our advisory structure and then meets in a variety of subcommittees. One of our subcommittees is focused on youth voice and evaluation and research. And the advisors that sort of tend to navigate to that committee and participate are folks that are really excited about how their voice in evaluation and research design can really create the change they're looking for in the world. So I'm going to talk just really briefly about the assessment tool that this group co-created with our research partners at Portland State University. So the members that made up this committee were primarily Youth Move or System of Care grantee youth leaders or near peers, so folks who are working in youth coordinator-like positions. They were all interested in evaluation as an advocacy and change-making strategy. And they had, up to this point, participated primarily as advisors to other organizations' research studies. We were really asking them to help us think about what was next, what was the work that they really wanted to jump into, designed by themselves, not necessarily given by another partner organization. And the challenge or the problem statement that was put forward by this committee was that when grant initiatives or when funders require youth engagement, it can be too easy to turn youth engagement into sort of a checklist. And once an entity has checked all of the boxes, they say, great, we satisfied our youth engagement requirement. Let's move on to the next deliverable. And we all know, right, that that's not authentic and meaningful youth engagement. And so the problem statement this crew wanted to think about was, how do we prevent that checklist tokenistic strategy from happening, and instead really challenge the field to more authentically engage youth. We brainstormed a lot. We proposed a lot of ideas about how we could address this problem. For example, we could create a toolkit about authentic youth engagement. We could produce a training, perhaps online, perhaps in person, where we could train agency leadership on what we meant by youth engagement. But along the line, another strategy of an assessment was proposed. And in the end, this is what the Youth Best Practice Committee chose as their focus area. And out of their work, they developed what we call the YVAL, or the Youth Voice at the Agency Level Assessment. And the strategy behind this was, if we create an assessment tool, then any organization can pick this up and do an assessment process on their youth engagement practices and determine how fully or not so fully developed are their youth engagement best practices. And we really saw this as a way to invest in change making in a more long-term way. Not a toolkit that's just going to be put on a shelf and never read, not a training that you can only go to if you were at the right moment at the right time, but rather something that could be really living and usable within the field. Really cool things happened throughout this process. We invited research partners who we trusted, who we'd worked with before, who had a really solid understanding of positive youth development and youth engagement and youth-driven decision-making. They provided training opportunities and learning opportunities for everyone on our committees to feel really confident in this process. And then they helped us in a co-development process to create what in the end became 2 assessments. So there's way more information about the YVAL on our website and at the link there. Happy to talk about that more another day, but really wanting to uplift in this moment the example of young people answer the question through their own leadership and decision making. A couple of things. Pausing because of my internet. If someone could give me some feedback about if you can hear me or not, that would be rad.
Yeah, your video is kind of frozen, but your audio is lagging a little, but you seem to be like equalizing back into where you, oh, and now.
I think I'm still here. If I turn my webcam off, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, yeah, we can hear your voice.
Okay, and then in about a minute, I'll turn the webcam back on and my poor internet connection might be able to handle it. Thank y'all. So a couple of really cool things about the YVAL that came up in this process. First, we did a scan to make sure that an assessment like this didn't already exist. And then second, we started the creation process. In the first steps to create the assessment required youth leaders to document what was best practice. Right? So if we're going to ask an agency to talk about how fully developed their youth engagement practices are, we have to have determined what those practices are to begin with. And so we're really excited about how this assessment turned into sort of like a coaching tool, regardless of using it in its formal assessment process, because the best practices are documented so well within it. The YVAL was designed with a couple of things in mind. It is a strengths-based tool. So when agencies take that out where they're doing strategies in young people are working well, and that was important to our youth co-creators. The what we call a 300-degree assessment, which means young people need to respond to it and adults need to respond to it. And I think this was particularly savvy and insightful in our creative project because it allows us to look at young people perceive that engagement is going well, or when adults perceive when engagement is going well. And it's really valuable to look at when there's tension and when there's agreement in those perceptions. So something unique about this assessment tool. And then we're seeing the tool's been used in the field for almost 3 years now. And we're seeing that there's some pretty successful opportunities for young people to advocate within their own organization to create change. And that can be an example of that is the YVEL looks at do we stipend young people for their lived expertise that they're sharing? If that shows up as a practice that the agency isn't very strong at, that response gives young people a really great data point to bring to their leadership to say, it's really best practice to stipend young people and honor our expertise. And here's where we could improve. All right, I told you I get a little excited about the YVEL, so I'll pause and let us move on. If you're curious, the assessments cover all of the themes that are on the slide here for you all. I mentioned there are 2 slides or 2 assessments. The second assessment is the YVOC, or the Youth Voice on Councils and Committees. That covers just the first 4 themes that are in bold on this slide. For those of you that are on the call that work for sort of a coalition or a partnership effort rather than for a single organization, the YVOC is designed for your work. So the YVOC looks at youth engagement when we bring multiple entities, multiple organizations around a single table, and we want to know if that table is engaging young people in meaningful ways. I think that's particularly helpful for those of us that have been part of a funding cycle that requires collaborative governance structures. Oftentimes that means there are stakeholders from many organizations helping make decisions. So that is the third example that we wanted to share with you. In just a moment, I'm going to pass off to Matt for our next section, and I'll drop a couple of more resources related to those examples in the chat. Please do flag questions our way if it would be helpful to talk more specifically about any of those examples. With that, Matt, I'll pass to you to get us set up for our next small group activity.
Sure. I dropped this in the chat, but I think something that's important too in us sharing these examples, maybe not in the same way, but there are other, like when we talk about being creative or the roles or the why, sharing examples of other communities that have utilized youth voice and made change, whether it was through policies or programs or whatever, is going to add to the excitement of actually being a part of that. Is like, hey, yes, I'm hearing my voice, but then I could actually be a part of something that's going to change. And when we've talked about the follow-up and showing them the evaluation results and then getting them involved in the dissemination or whatever pieces it is, it's always going to be stronger to show them what it looks like in action as well. So, and any opportunities you can do that, and that might be in that like introductory meeting or whatnot, is like, hey, we're excited to do this because we know it can work, and here's some examples of it working. So what we want to do next is we want to break off into some small groups and just start talking a little bit about your communities, your examples, and how you want to involve youth and young adults into this process. I know in our introductory small group earlier, I was starting to poke at some of these questions with the folks in my group and just seeing what their interests were, where they were at in the process. Some people are at the beginning of the process, which is a really great place to be having this conversation, because in being mindful of involving young people at the beginning versus, oh, we're already in, we've already done X, Y, and Z, and now we want to involve youth. Not that it's impossible to start at that point, but it's always good if you're starting off efforts or even reflecting on those efforts to involve youth during those stages. So we want to get you all into small groups and just discuss these questions that we see on the screen, and we'll put in the chat as well. How are you currently engaged, either through your grant or organization or program, in youth-led program or evaluation? And that might be not at all, and it might be, here are some examples. For those in the group who might have some examples of what they've done, maybe be brave and take a little bit of leadership in your group to share how that's gone and what it's looked like, and how you've been able to access youth and their voice in your evaluation efforts. Number two, where would you like to be more involved in evaluation efforts? So where are you at, and then where would you like to be? So if you are just starting out, what are your visions based off of some of our conversations today? And if you've done it, what are some ways that you might be improving on those efforts or expanding those efforts? And then finally, what would you like to have the grant or program evaluate? What are the key components or objectives that you have in actually doing this? You got to answer that why at the beginning. And you can do that hopefully with young people of, we want to improve services or we want to improve our program, but be specific, get really into the nitty gritty of what are we evaluating? Is it the efficacy of our program? Is it who's involved into the process? So what are some of those components of the program that you want to evaluate? Because the reason you're evaluating is because you probably want to either change or improve something. So what are those things? So we're going to get into small groups. How much time did we say, Johanna, for this part?
Yeah, so you'll just under 20 minutes. So we'll come back at 5 minutes after the hour. And before we move into small groups, one recommendation: when you show up in small groups, will you all make a group decision about who will be willing to report out your discussion to the large group? So we'll have a few minutes for small groups to report back their key insights when they come back. So make sure you have a reporter outer, and otherwise we will send you a message and bring you back as breakouts close just 5 after the hour.
And we'll try to sprinkle throughout the groups, but there's only 2 of us. So be sure to be generating these conversations. Maybe we get some brave volunteers to start the conversation and keep it going. We'll try to kind of pop in and out, but like Johanna said, we want folks to report out. So we want there to be some good convos with everyone.
Awesome. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. I think there might be one group still.
I closed all the rooms, so everybody should be back. But yeah, the participation went down quite a bit.
Okay, yeah, this might be who's here then. Hopefully the person reporting out did not leave. So thanks everybody for engaging in a little bit of that as we get, like we said, this is day one and we're really looking to focus on getting folks to start talking about this and think about ways that youth can be involved. Because evaluation at its center, the reason we do it is to make systems and programs better and more effective for those that we're working with. So I just want to thank everybody for getting into that space, even if you're new to it and you don't have a lot of examples. Hopefully we're learning from each other and able to engage in this process to get those gears turning and think about what are ways that I can start to engage youth in this process as well, because that's going to be an important component. So we'll go question by question, and then whoever had as the reporter for your group, maybe you can just share a couple thoughts about or examples from the group that you discussed. So the first question was, how are you currently engaged in grantee or youth-led program evaluation efforts?
So a couple of things that we talked about is having a youth council, as well as doing a youth survey, not just those who are participating in services, but youth in the community as a whole, through some high schools that we have relationship with. And then also more QI related, but looking at really improving our reassessment and follow-ups with post intakes of our clients and kids, and also trying to connect families and youth to resources to get them more involved in their care.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I like that you said that I think about, we talk a lot about is, sometimes people are like, where do I find young people? Think about who you're already connected to. What partnerships do you already have as an organization that might have relationships to be able to introduce you to other youth to come into that space. So that's really, I think that's a strong place to start is, for example, a school. Other folks?
I was in group one and we didn't really come up with a note taker. I forgot that part.
Okay.
But I think a lot of us are, maybe had a hard time answering some of those questions because we're at the beginning. But I like what you said, like it does feel good to be considering evaluation from the start and how we're going to include that in our process, so that that's not a piece that's left out or that comes just, oh yeah, we should do this piece. So I like being really thoughtful from the beginning and hope to learn from people that have some expertise to share. And I love the why val, just things like that. Learning about some tools is a good place to start.
Yeah, Allison, I love that. Both just bravery and saying, hey, we're just getting started, right? I don't have all the answers yet. And then also coupled with that value of understanding that having young people at the table from the beginning is really best case. I have been a part of too many projects where we get to the analysis phase and we ask young people about what they're interested in and what they're curious about. And they are so curious about very important things, but we didn't measure for those things because they weren't involved in developing the questions in the beginning. So even any amount of young people being able to be curious with you in the portion of evaluation design is really key to being happy at the analysis phase, right?
One of the things that I had mentioned in one of the groups that I was in as well is thinking you can think small or big with evaluation. Like I know that when I was a youth coordinator, we would sometimes just evaluate a specific program. Like we had an internship program for social media and journalism. And so we would look at that and say, what are the topics, we would meet with those young people that were involved with it, get feedback. How can we change it? Is the compensation good for it? Are people reading the topics? But then if you have like a host organization, or you look at your program as a whole, there's an evaluation at that level too. So if you're just starting out, it might be fruitful to start small and just pick one program or one area that you're looking to focus on and then go from there. Was there anybody else who had any examples of program evaluation that they're currently engaged in? All right, well, so the next step, hopefully if people answered, we're just starting out, the second question was a little bit for you as your ideas were hopefully percolating during the presentation. Where would you like to be more involved in evaluation efforts? So if you're just starting out thinking about it, what's sort of on your mind about where to go?
One of the things we discussed, and we both had some issues with trying to keep our youth council active. It comes and goes and it dies off, and you reconstitute it and it dies off again. So how can we get a youth council that can stay perpetuated over time?
Yeah, if you have something when it's in that revitalized state, I think a good place to start is checking in with them and saying, what's going to keep, just being very direct, what's going to keep you here? What's going to keep you coming back? What is exciting to you about this process? I know that sometimes when we would have leadership councils or meetings, sometimes we had to do a couple of sessions where it's sort of like getting to know each other, or working on a small project together, or doing something to create group connectivity. And then you can kind of get at, okay, hey, we've noticed like there's room for improvement in this area, and then kind of moving from there. Youth, retention in groups is, I think, something that everybody has struggled with, but finding ways and being really direct and asking them about ways that, again, like going back to the roles and the interest matching, being really specific about how to match up youth with what their interests are, I think is another good place to start. Other thoughts about where people would like to be more involved in evaluation?
Speaking for me, I think I want to be more involved with having the youth have a voice into what's going on in, I guess, the type of evaluation. I guess that's what I'm looking at. The youth council and having focus groups, I think that is something that our department that I know of has not actively engaged in. And I think this is a great idea for us to begin looking at how we can increase the voices of our kids. And, this is something totally new, so I can't speak on like where we're at, but I can just let you know that this is something that we definitely will look into implementing to make sure that our kids have voices and what we can do to make sure that they're doing well.
That's great, Iris. And that openness to asking young people about how they want to be engaged and what they think evaluation should look like is a really good place to start. We have seen really creative things happen. One of our Youth Move chapters in New York established, it's a focus group strategy, right? But it was developed from young people, by young people, and is called What Helps, What Harms. And that process has now been replicated many times in their community, and now across our chapter network multiple times. And it's young people going to groups of youth and asking them a couple of questions. What's harming you, right? What's not working for you in the system? What's helping you? What are the things that are working? And then sometimes there's a third question: what do you want to do about it? And it's just, some pizza and a circle of young people and a flip chart paper. And it has elicited really powerful responses that have helped make advocacy dreams come true. And another project that I'm a part of, the evaluation tool of choice, has been a head, heart, beat activity. Some of you might be familiar with that, but at the end of every convening that involves young people and adults, they do a 3-question short word response to the head, heart, feet prompts. And I can drop a resource about that in the chat in a little bit. But in both cases, it was young people who chose the tool that they felt like would be most effective, which can be really emboldening in partnership.
Awesome. And then our last question was, what would you like to have the grant or program evaluate? So what are the components of what it is that you're doing that you're looking for feedback on, or looking to change or improve, or just see, is this effective? Is this working? What are some of those examples of things? And that's the same, like if you're just starting out, this is a good question to be reflecting on, because you can be planting those seeds now. And if you're bringing in people in and asking them as well, but you going into this process, you're going to have some thoughts about what that is too. So this is a good space to share what some of those components might be.
One of the components, this is ours again, I think one of the components that I would love to see what the evaluations can bring is based on a system that I'm a part of, is just to see, what are people's thoughts, feelings, what works for them, what doesn't work, how we can do better. That's just bottom line. Yeah, that's just really it.
Other thoughts? One thing that might be important when you're considering, especially if you're evaluating a program, is not to forget, because sometimes we're like, we really need to shift like the intention of the program or the content, but the logistics of programs are really important, like the time that things happen at, the overview, what agendas look like those components, and adding in and making sure that you're evaluating sort of those components that might get overlooked as well. Other thoughts about what you would like to evaluate?
I'm always interested in talking with young people about when we're looking for like satisfaction data, like are we doing good work, or are we unsatisfied with it, and when are we looking for more like programmatic insight, like what would we change or how should we change it, and thinking and getting a little geeky about sort of all-encompassing questions versus like very specific questions. And then if you follow me and you also get geeky about thinking about what tool or measurement instrument might best fit either of those scenarios, you might like part 2 of this session where we practice picking some tools and forming those questions.
And just another note, when you're going through that process of evaluation, documentation is always so important, whether it is like if you're doing a survey, that's going to be kind of inherent, but if you're doing a focus group or something, and that could be a role for a young person, is taking notes or capturing what you're hearing, or having multiple note takers, or if you're working on a project, just thinking about that just inspired me to think about a little bit about how we're capturing the data, because that is going to be important to how we relay that data as well later on, whether it's back to youth participants or back to our stakeholders or the grantors or whoever it might be. Perfect. Well, use these questions as a like a thought exercise as you move through and you think about ways to move through evaluation and get started in that process, if that's where you're at. So one of the final activities we want to do, as I mentioned at the beginning, Mentee is a great tool for sort of virtual feedback, which we used at the beginning. And we have just one more activity we want to do with Mentee. So again, menti.com, and the code is 99835792. And we are going to practice a little quality improvement. So in thinking about today, one of the processes we sometimes go through after meetings is rose, bud, thorn. So rose is something that went well, that was maybe new knowledge, something that you enjoyed. A bud is sort of the potential, like what's next, where can I go from here, something inspiring that is sort of like what's my next step as that flower starts to bloom and I start to get excited about what's happening. And a thorn is kind of a challenge. What kind of roadblocks are going to be in the way? What might be a pain point, and what might I struggle with in this process? So we're going to use Mentee just to see where people are at with rose, bud, and thorn. Is it 3 separate questions, Johanna, or is it all, like, how is it set up? So, all right, so we'll do rose first. So just as a reminder, rose is something that has gone well from today's training. All right, realizing that others are just starting out as well. Yeah, sometimes it can feel a little like, should I have been doing this? But again, like your programs may not have like an evaluator position. So, you know, a lot of people are just starting out or looking at capacity. I enjoyed getting to bounce ideas off of folks from all around the country. I love that part about these kinds of sessions as well. Learning about the YVAL, ideas for youth-friendly language, conceptualizing evaluation opportunities. Yeah, those examples are going to be super important as you think about ways to either take good ideas from other examples or think about ways to involve youth using those examples as well. Providing a clear path for evaluation. I'm glad that that has happened. Creative ideas for soliciting youth engagement and feedback through an art project, creative writing, journalism. Yeah, like it doesn't have to be like answer these 3 questions on this piece of paper kind of a thing, you know. Through focus groups, through art projects, there's other ways to collect feedback and data. Small discussion groups, awesome. We love that that was beneficial, that you're able to get a little bit of one-on-one time with other folks. Different ways that that youth can be involved in evaluation. We're really excited about that because that's, you know, that's what we really want to see. And then folks saying that happening from the beginning is really, really awesome. Great. So next we'll move on to bud. So this is sort of the potential, like what can be, what's exciting next steps. Oh, I think, okay, Thorn was next actually. So hopefully you read and didn't listen to me and you read what was on your screen. If not, we'll mix and mingle over the next 2 slides. That was a challenge or something that might be difficult to think about and moving on based off of what you learned today. More examples, yeah, that's I learn best from examples as well. So just seeing all of the different ways we can perform evaluation, how to get others on board with involving youth. Yep, more specifics, more time on that. Small groups felt too small, more people to share and have different perspectives would have been helpful. So larger small groups, getting consistent youth involvement. Yep. All right, perfect. Well, thank you for that feedback. We always love hearing that. And then finally, the bud. What's the potential? What's like the next thing that you see? Oh, maybe. Okay, so one bud, one thing that you're going to take away that's a potential for the future. We like to hear that one, especially using the why val. Going to work on using more diverse methods of evaluation. Yeah, like some of it's trial and error, you know, and that's like trying something out, and maybe you send out a survey and you get like no results. So maybe you try focus groups or something else. Coming back to another training, awesome. Review some of the resources that were shared today to see if we incorporate into our evaluation. That's perfect. Doing that, some of that research on your own, using more ways to evaluate programs, so becoming diverse and how you're engaging in that, and then more examples. Awesome. We're just really excited to have this conversation. It sounds like a lot of people are in that either beginning stage or like looking to involve youth more. So excited that some of the resources and conversations we've had today have been helpful for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for leading us through that tiny CQI process as we wrap up. I have the honor of giving you just a few last very important pieces of information. So it's about what comes next. So this is part one of a 3-part series. I'll give you a teaser about what we're going to cover the next 2 sessions. We have one piece of thought work that we would love for you to do between now and next Tuesday. And that's to watch this very short video that will introduce you to the concept of theory of change, which will help make session 2 make more sense and let us dive deeper into the content earlier in the session. So you are welcome to join us. Next week, we are going to be connecting the development of a logic model and designing the direction of our youth programs with our evaluation plan. Our small group work will be focused on getting our hands into practicing both the framework of a logic model and then choosing evaluation mediums and starting to craft questions that we might use to evaluate. Session 3 is going to be about using our data, where you're going to meet new presenters in both of our next sessions. Joshua joining us next week, Steph joining us 2 weeks from now. Week 3 is going to be very tangible about how do you turn raw data into easy to make, easy to understand, easy to advocate with infographics, flyers, PowerPoint slides. We've worked with Steph on previous sessions, and everyone raves about how concrete the practice is. So that's where we're going to go for the next 2 sessions. If you're not already registered, we'd love to have you join. When we wrap up today, you're going to get a feedback form. We would love to have your feedback authentically, because Matt and I like to do to see our work improve session over session, and because your feedback is going to help us make this whole training series better. And as a federally funded NTAC center, your feedback as participants is what demonstrates the effectiveness and success of the support in the field and allows us to continue to do this work. So we are grateful when you complete that feedback form. I see Joanne has dropped that in the chat box. Excellent. And then our final message is don't be strangers. The NTAC resources are readily available online, all places social. We would love to stay in community with you. And if you have questions that we didn't respond to during this session, but you'd like to submit them as a technical assistance request, Youth Move team members are available, but also a whole circle of subject matter experts to support your efforts, and we'd love to hear from you. A really big thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you same time next week for part 2 of this training. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.